Hello, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted today to be able to host another episode of Vina Talks ND Life. And I'm taking even greater pleasure to welcome Georgina Philippou to our call, to our podcast. Georgina has held a number of positions at the FCA, most notably a COO with responsibility directly within internal diversity issues, as well as most recently a senior advisor with responsibility within the regulatory framework of diversity. We're delighted to have here today, and obviously I'm speaking on the we because of GAIN, the Group for Autism Insurance Investment and Neurodiversity, as we're seeking to have your own educated and massively well-informed opinions on certain questions we asked our members, our corporate as well as individual members, to provide back in response to the FCA consultation paper on D&I. We do appreciate, Georgina, and welcome, by the way. We do appreciate that this is solely your own sort of insight, given your years and years of experience, obviously your own observations, and the things that you, as a passionate advocate for D&I, would like to see happening in the future, as we're all trying to pull in together, amplify our voices, and close the say-do gap. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Vina. Hello, and hello to everybody who's on this call. I'm really delighted to be here and working with GAIN once again.
Thank you very much. It really means a lot to us, as well as our members. I will kick it off with the first question. There's quite a few. I think we have about 6 questions to cover today. So I'll start with the first one, and I hope you don't mind me reading. I need to make sure that everybody's basically fully represented, and I don't sort of alter, edit, or really dilute the questions by using my own sort of language to it. So, will the FCA look to provide guidance on good practice or their own expectations for the various stages of recruitment of neurodivergent talent? And this actually goes from the alpha, the advertising, through to the omega, the recruitment process, the onboarding, and indeed the settling in phase.
Thank you for the question. It's a really great question for at least a couple of reasons. One is it shows the importance of guidance in D&I to provide flesh on the bones of rules and regulations, to show what good looks like, to provide case studies and examples, and so on. And it shows the importance of looking at D&I processes in a holistic and end-to-end way, as you put it, from the alpha to the omega, breaking down processes into their component parts and then building them up again. But Vina, as this is our first question, let's begin at the beginning. The FCA's consultation paper, which is the subject of today's discussion, was published alongside a similar, not identical, but similar paper from the PRA on the 25th of September this year. And the consultation closes on the 18th of December. So mark that date in your diaries. The FCA's overall ambition is to improve diversity of thought across the financial services sector, to reduce groupthink, encourage healthier cultures, unlock new talent, and increase the understanding of and provision for diverse consumer needs. And the FCA proposes to do this through a range of interventions, which, subject to feedback in the consultation, should become rules and regulations later in 2024. And these are proposals around, 1, requiring firms to establish and report on targets relevant to that firm. Number 2, requiring firms to collect, report, and disclose certain D&I data at board, senior leadership, and all staff levels, plus some inclusion metrics which are specified. Number 3, requiring firms to establish, implement, and maintain a D&I strategy. 4, and this is really important from a culture point of view, clarifying that certain types of discriminatory and non-inclusive behavior, such as bullying, harassment, victimization, fostering, and intimidating environment, fall within the definition of non-financial misconduct, even if they happen outside the workplace, and therefore are a matter for the regulator. And 5, clarifying that D&I is a non-financial risk, and that is, it's a business issue and should be treated in the same systematic way as any other business issue. So to come back to the question specifically, you can see that these proposed new rules are far-reaching and hard-hitting, but they don't cover everything. And this is because D&I is a really challenging issue. There's no silver bullet, no one-size-fits-all approach, and firms are at very different stages of their D&I journeys. And don't forget, the FCA regulates 60,000 firms, so they're bound to be in very different positions. Also, D&I is, of course, a wider societal issue, so the FCA cannot be expected to cover everything in its rules and to do it all, to transform the industry all by itself. So while the FCA does issue guidance alongside its rules, for example, you might have seen, Vina, the D&I multi-firm work that it published in 2022, which is full of examples and good ideas. So even if it does publish guidance, the guidance might not be exactly what each firm wants. This means that other organizations have an important part to play here. I'm thinking especially about professional bodies, for example, who can create safe environments to share ideas. They can publish case studies, they can run conferences, provide training, and so on. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investments, so I know from personal experience doing my CPD that they do lots in this space. The Investment Association, just one other example, has a plethora of activities and material on its website. And of course, GAIN and its new partner, the Diversity Project, you both do excellent work in this space. You know, the list is endless. And if you just do a bit of research, you will unearth a lot of guidance. And finally, as the question is specifically about recruitment, don't forget the important role that recruitment consultants play in this space too. Some are better than others at running processes that are inclusive and providing inclusive long lists and short lists, and some need encouragement and challenge to do it. So at the very least, HR professionals in firms and external recruiters, they should be doing things like making it clear that neurodivergent people are welcome to apply for jobs, drafting job descriptions and interview questions so they focus on essential skills for doing the job, providing interview questions in advance so you're testing skills and experience, not the ability to make things up on the spot, and hiring and training in small cohorts to create instant inclusive communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Such a rich response and such a realistic response, which I personally, and I'm sure on behalf also, speaking on behalf of GAIN, I thoroughly appreciate. Alone, you know, the role of the recruiters in this kind of chain, and I do appreciate the occasional, as some of our good friends who've got a degree of, obviously, you know, safety to open up and sort of speak of the so-called Mexican standoff, whereby you expect somebody to sort of crumble and say, it's fine, let me now see the different talent. We cannot always sort of leave to make the commission in the same way as we've done for many, many years. I think we have a stake, a moral responsibility to create conscious evolution and to really demand it by breaking down the sort of barriers. I suppose when I hear you, and I hope I've heard you, you know, carefully enough to have taken all these notes, it really asks us to move from a medical to a social sort of model, whereby rather than trying to cure the difference, we try to enable the difference by really removing the barriers that are stopping people from claiming the potential they can easily sort of fulfill once they have the right environment.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, Vina. That medical to social analogy, I think it is spot on. And when it comes to barriers, the other important thing is to know that those barriers are there, even if they're not very visible, which I think means pausing every time you're doing something, whether it's recruiting an individual, whether it's leading a team, whether it's drafting a policy or strategy, just pausing and thinking D&I at every stage of that process. Are there D&I implications? What are they? Am I doing this in a diverse and inclusive way? And you can ask yourself that about everything that you do in the workplace.
Absolutely. And without wanting to sort of, you know, take away the emphasis from any of the questions we have actually still to go through, how important is that to embed D&I rather than treat it as a foreign body that somehow you have to sort of, you know, include as an add-on? It has to infiltrate. It has to be there. It has to be part of the way that we lead the way that we manage people, the way that we interact with our customers. And I loved what you said about the representation of the customer base, and the difference in people's sort of journeys because of their own culture and because of their own sort of intricacies and esoteric sort of values, which everybody is welcome to have. But at the same time, we somehow have to level, the playing field, obviously, in order to allow everybody a fair chance of promotion, of acknowledgement, and ultimately, what's very important for me, utilization. People need to feel utilized.
Yes.
Present.
Yes, and I don't think we could talk for ages without going to the questions.
Clearly.
We must go to the questions, but I don't think that organizations who don't embed D&I as part of their everyday processes and who take a siloed approach to this, I don't think they can get away with it much longer. Not just because regulations are on their way, but also because society demands it, consumers will demand it, your future employees, which are your future leadership after all, they demand it as well.
And dare I say, and I promise to go straight to the second question, technology demands it. Again, with AI, amazing flurry of what we often say overproduction. However, ultimately, we're now going back to speaking ethics, and who's ultimately the decision maker? Who's got the accountability? Well, if we are very much aware about the power of people, harnessing all these amazing skill sets and most importantly, attitudes towards technology, towards productivity and bottom line and every other sort of corporate thing that we are all very much bothered with, then we should have a very readily available answer. Second question. What is the FCA doing to ensure neurodivergent employees' needs are met?
Interesting, and thank you for the question. I'm not sure whether it's internal facing or external facing. That is whether it's about the FCA's own employees or financial services employees more generally. But just to put a different spin on things, because we've already talked external and we'll go on to talk more external, let me talk a little bit about the FCA as an employer, because its experiences and practices are relevant to most employers. There is only one regulator, but the FCA is an employer like any other organization. And from recollection from my time at the FCA as an employer takes neurodiversity very seriously. I remember when I was Chief Operating Officer, we were building and designing and moving into a brand new building in East London. And the thought and care and attention to detail that went into ensuring the new building was inclusive was extraordinary. For neurodivergent colleagues, we thought about colour schemes, we thought about layout, signage, different types of working environments, and so on. And the FCA also did things like issuing guidance about meeting etiquette, how to have inclusive meetings, for example, these are all good practices, but issuing agendas and papers in advance, encouraging people to contribute in different ways, providing training in inclusive leadership, ensuring line managers had inclusion objectives and were measured on them, providing additional time or support for colleagues with dyslexia, and taking neurodiversity into account when allocating work and doing appraisals and all of those important kind of staff development milestones. And I should say that what the FCA did with and for neurodivergent colleagues was beneficial to everyone across the organisation. Who doesn't want a well-designed office, well-run meetings, good line management and leadership, and fair allocation and appraisal of work? We all want that, whether we're neurotypical or neurodiverse. In an FCA context, this is important because it does a wide range of very challenging work, from rulemaking and policy making to research and analysis, supervision and enforcement. And it's supported by an extensive technology platform and loads of data and intelligence. So the FCA needs employees, not just with different skills, experiences and backgrounds, but who can think differently and come at a problem from different angles to find different solutions. And if the FCA gets it right, it works better. It makes better decisions for consumers and firms and markets. And this is especially important as it becomes a regulator for the 21st century, increasingly data-led and making use of AI. So that's the FCA experience. I think you could take the word FCA out and substitute any firm in our audience today, and that will be just as relevant.
That is incredible, though, because obviously, unless you have somebody of your ilk and your experience to tell us about all these amazing sort of built-in activities, we wouldn't have guessed. Have to admit, and forgive me already in advance, but we all carry bias, and my own bias when it comes to regulator is almost up in an ivory tower, almost as if somebody who's quite technical about the ways that things are being measured, not necessarily embedding the anthropocentric sort of values therein. And when I hear you speaking, you almost provided me right there in like a minute or so a toolkit of the things that we, as a movement of neurodivergence and cognitive sort of diversity acceptance, we're trying to sort of call upon to be implemented, to be valued, to be appreciated, and most importantly, to be understood and for people to become aware. And it almost begs the point, or perhaps the wide open sort of invitation to your ex-colleagues. Why don't you come over and sort of speak to us about this good practice? Because as far as I'm concerned, that's a brilliant practice already built in. And having visited the Stratford offices, I have to say that, yes, it's a yes across all of the points. I've seen the design and it's really very inclusive. So, wow, well done.
Well, if you like reading long reports, I encourage you to have a look at the FCA's annual D&I report, which is about itself as an employer. It's published alongside the FCA's annual report every year. And that is long because it is quite detailed. So, you know, like a number of commercial organizations, the FCA has targets, for example. It collects data about its demographic makeup. And there is a lot of information about how the FCA itself is progressing against its own targets, what its demographic makeup is. The ethnicity action plan is in there, the actions that the FCA has taken over the year and plans to take, they're all in there as well. So in terms of a toolkit, you know, there are a lot of ideas there. But it's fair to say that, like every organization, the FCA is also on a journey. And what I especially liked about being a senior advisor for regulatory diversity at the FCA was the chance to learn from other organizations. Because as I already said, you know, there's no one organization or no one person that has all the answers to this. This is prime territory for organizations getting together, sharing notes, or, you know, in a non-competitive way. This can be done in a way that does not disclose commercially sensitive information that would be for the benefit of the whole industry and therefore for consumers.
Beautifully said, especially since everybody seems to be thriving on accentuating this fear of perhaps, you know, we're giving away too much of our IP. You're not giving away your IP. What you're giving away is a sharing of a collective power and intelligence over what really potentially works for everybody. And when I speak about universal design, and I think we would both agree on this, I'm always thinking of Microsoft's amazing toolkit that basically speaks of the temporary, the permanent, and the situational sort of challenges that a person sort of encounters in their life. Again, you know, basic examples of non-verbal sort of attitude during a call. Why? Because the person might be autistic. The person actually might have no voice because of laryngitis, or the person might be having a very rough day, going through some really demanding sort of personal events. And why should we have to almost excuse or explain ourselves, since that range in itself already indicates that everybody can potentially be affected by life happening?
Yes. The FCA does a lot of work on vulnerable consumers. And what's interesting about its definition of vulnerable is that it shows that everyone at various different points of their life might be vulnerable. It's not a particular static group that's somehow separate to the rest of society. It is all of us. And on that societal point, I will say that the financial services industry is about financial services, obviously, but it's so important and so all-pervasive and impacts every citizen in the United Kingdom and beyond. So it's almost a social service, a social role as well. And I think that would argue for, you know, trying as far as possible to get together compare notes, share good practice, and thereby raise the bar across the whole industry. And I suppose that brings us back to professional and trade bodies. They're very well placed to do that.
Absolutely. And I think they need, again, if I can be raw, they need this kind of collective power. It's great to have great members, members who basically boast the lion's share of the productivity in our otherwise amazing sector, but mobilizing those members, getting those members to really create the practical applications and then give back to both the consumers as well as their own employees, who ultimately are the window to those consumers. And again, what you said about being social resonates so much with me. Again, as a behavioral economist, as a person who takes advocacy, active advocacy in the merits of financial education alone, the fact of the matter is we need to make sure that everybody uses the financial system in order to be fully incorporated in our social system, in the social system that's built in the way it does sort of operate. So absolutely. We need more of all of us coming together as a community. This goes over and above, I suppose, individualized P&Ls.
I agree.
Back to your opinion, though, because we are here for you today and because of you and your great sort of knowledge and experience. And I'd like to hear your opinion. Are there any benefits for the employer, in capital letters, in hiring and making an inclusive environment for neurodivergent people?
So, Vina, would you like a one-word answer to that? Obviously, that word is yes, but let's go into the detail a bit. Alongside its 2021 discussion paper, which preceded the current consultation paper, the FCA published an extensive literature review, which looked at, I think it was about 180 independent research reports of different kinds on the business case for diversity and inclusion. And that business case is definitely there alongside the moral and ethical case for D&I. So diverse and inclusive organizations tend to be more innovative, more flexible and creative, better at problem solving and decision making, with greater employee engagement and well-being, and they're more resilient. And when it comes to the benefits of neurodiversity specifically, you will know better than I. Studies show that cognitive diversity brings 28% higher revenues, I saw quoted in one, 30% greater profits, that neurodivergent colleagues can outperform neurotypical colleagues when their roles match their skills. This was a JP Morgan case study. That neurodivergent teams generate efficiencies and economies. This is an EY case study where they implemented a redesign of a certain business process, which saved about £80,000. And there's also an L&G case study along similar lines about the benefits of employing or having neurodivergent teams. So there's lots of evidence there of the benefits. And just in the interest of time, I would say finally, we know that 2024 is going to be a challenging year for firms in the financial services sector. Not just because of what's happening in terms of changes to rules and so on, but the wider context, a changing and unstable geopolitical environment, new challenges around artificial intelligence, which we've mentioned, ESG, just to name a few of the things that are on the horizon. And the bottom line for me is that these new challenges need a new way of thinking, and the old ways of thinking just won't cut it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's a matter of evolution and sustainability. And unless we have that, and unless we're flexible to approach all these notions, and you mentioned ESG and you mentioned D&I, others were speaking about D&I or DD or any of the new sort of, acronyms that we keep on exploring. And we are very, very thirsty, really, about learning and sort of expanding our own sort of horizons. For me, it's very important to sort of, be a little bit more flexible with the language. And sometimes if we don't feel that one certain term fully covers the notion at hand, come up with a new word. And essentially, it's not really the word in itself, I'd argue. It's what lies really underneath it. The different layers we're prepared to basically unveil. And again, the unpacking, as we always say, how prepared are we to accept vulnerabilities? How prepared are we to communicate? And And really, ultimately, going back to leadership, how prepared are we to really fully act as role models, not just money-making machines role models, but human and highly productive role models, really?
Yes, let me just say a couple of words there about words and about humans. Words do matter, obviously, but there comes a time, particularly in this D&I area, where you need to move to actions. Because we all love words, and we can talk about words and what they mean for ages, and that can detract us sometimes from taking positive action for positive change. The other thing about words is that you're much more likely to be forgiven for using the wrong words if you have already built a relationship of trust with the people that you work with. And I think this is a really important leadership point. Yes. Because it might be difficult to keep track of the changing vocabulary in this space. And so we are bound to make mistakes ourselves sometimes. But if people understand and trust us that we are coming from the right place, that we have the right intent, then they're more likely to forgive us, and we are all more likely to be able to move on. But you absolutely need that relationship of trust, which is often missing, because we build our relationships with people who are like us, not with diverse people.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing. Authenticity. And I'm biased because I would say it's a Greek word, of course. But then again, many negative words are Greek, so let's not go there.
They're all Greek, aren't they, Vina?
So question 4, we're getting there. Now, many of our members obviously exercising their rights professionally, being mainly, obviously, given that we have a big chunk representing the insurance side of things, claims, and you're demonstrating your accountability and your ownership in the space of enabling people and businesses is really coming with an element of fulfilling the claims. You're getting a loss, you're there to enable the business and you pay. But often enough, we do get points like the question I'm about to read, which basically says, how can the FCA help make the insurance claim process more autistic or neurodiversity, basically, as a bigger sort of catch-all friendly?
Yes, thank you. This question might seem quite specific because it's about a specific process in a sector of financial services, but it does actually go to the heart of the FCA's statutory objectives to protect consumers. And it goes wider than just the D&I consultation paper that we're talking about now. Importantly, the FCA's consumer duty was implemented during the year, at least in respect of extant products and services. And in general, that duty requires firms to avoid foreseeable harm to consumers by putting consumer needs first. So it's a step up from the old treating customers fairly principle. And it looks in particular at 4 areas: products and services, price and value, customer understanding, and customer support, and really requires the firm to put itself in the shoes of its customers to ensure that they're getting the kind of service that they deserve. And in order to do that, a firm needs to understand its customer base, including how diverse its customer base is and which demographics are represented in its customer base. And you can see that the claims process would fall firmly into these new requirements in terms of how customers, complainants and claimants are treated, and ensuring that those with particular needs are not disadvantaged. So the consumer duty and the D&I proposals taken together create a really powerful platform for consumer protection, and together they're going to lead to an absolute step change in how customers are treated.
Yes, absolutely. I'll keep it short, but I really feel like connecting back, because what you say really fully resonates in the sense of the ultimate KYC, know your customer. I mean, for my 25 years in the space, quite often it's been misconstrued and probably wrongly taken as a synonym to compliance, whereby you're checking your lists of any, fraud or any money laundering or any sort of I guess, barred individuals from exercising X, Y, and Z sort of activity in the space, when really the KYC, and in my sort of books, the extension to KYE, know your employee, goes back to how you can best include, engage, and provide services for them. And ultimately, for the person who basically calls up a call center, and sometimes obviously automated, I say, call center, speaking to a chatbot, even, on a chat, use the chat function 24-hour, perfect. I'd love to do that and get an answer. But what if my communication skills differ to the neurotypical, which is bound to be the case, right? How do I get my message across, and how do I feel like I'm not shooting myself on the foot, rather than I'm enabling a better communication given the skill sets and given the tendencies that I have by nature? So it's very important.
Yeah, and this is absolutely what the regulators are trying to achieve with the diversity initiative and the proposals, because it is bound to be the case that organizations that are more diverse in themselves will be able to recognize diversity within their customer base and recognize the needs of those customers and how best to respond to those needs.
Yeah, thank you so much. Another call for your opinion. No surprise. What is the right balance of one side aspirational targets, the good haves, versus the enforcement for the regulator to strike in driving, obviously, this agenda?
Very interesting question. Let me say something at the beginning about my own personal journey when it comes to targets. I think when I first started working in diversity and inclusion, I don't think I was a supporter of targets. I mean, I think I got them confused with quotas for a start, but there was a number of reasons. But when my patience started to run out, and when I saw through the work of women in finance and other organizations, the impact that targets can have in terms of speeding up progress and in terms of focusing the minds of firms and senior leaders, I became and still am a firm supporter of targets. And I think some of this reasoning lies behind the FCA making targets one of its main proposed interventions. So it seems to me that what the FCA has done is chosen the interventions it thinks will have the most impact and which are clearly measurable. And the FCA will also have in mind that many of the larger firms it regulates will, through their membership of professional bodies and trades associations, bodies like Women in Finance, be operating with targets already. Now, the question that we've been asked today, it's interesting because it goes from targets to enforcement. And the reality is that the FCA has a very wide range of regulatory tools at its disposal, and that an awful lot happens, some of it behind the scenes. So enforcement action is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of FCA actions and decisions. So at one end of the scale, the FCA can create frameworks, set standards, issue guidance, convene discussions and debates. It can work with individual firms to raise standards, for example, by issuing Dear CEO letters. It can work with, that's a group example. It can work with groups of firms to raise standards, CEO letters. It can work with individual firms to raise standards, for example, by requiring independent reviews. And then at the other end, as we work our way up the scale, of course, the FCA can enforce against firms and individuals, which it will do in the most egregious cases of misconduct and where there is sufficient evidence to bring a case. And I don't want to guess at this stage what approach the FCA is going to take in respect of these D&I proposals, including the ones on targets. But given that we're still at consultation stage, and given that any rules are unlikely to be implemented before, say, late 2024, and that there's likely to be a bedding in period after that, we might be looking at a couple of years at least before we start to see some enforcement action. And as I said, the conduct would have to be egregious and the enforcement action would have to be evidence-based. So it is rightly a very high bar. So what's more likely, at least in the early stages of the new regime, is behind the scenes challenge and use of the full range of regulatory tools, which is effective, but of course, sometimes less visible.
Beautiful. By the way, you also remind me, consultation phase, So right. I do believe we do have, and GAIN has already collectively, having consulted with our members, particularly the corporate members, have already sent a report and response back to, in terms of feedback, obviously informal feedback, to the consultation paper of the FCA. Everybody else who feels the need, well, the responsibility, the ownership of writing back to the FCA, providing their own feedback, have still got time until the 18th, I believe, of the month to submit the feedback. And that's very important because honestly, in closing the say-do gap and really being impactful, and again, not sort of spending our time pondering over language, but really, which is important, but really to take action and take the first step that's going to guarantee us walking into 2024, that's going to be much more sort of critical for us in implementing these changes. We have to make sure we do that collectively. And I think that brings me to the other question that kind of almost distinguishes between the individual and the collective sort of impact. So why do you think neurodiversity hardly features in the FCA consultation paper? And what can we, at an individual as well as a collective level, do to showcase neurodiversity and the need for a solid support framework?
Vina, first, well done for responding, and responding before the deadline. Most people will respond at midnight on the 18th of December, but that's good to hear. I think that this question is a really important one for us today. So I've described the FCA proposals, and it's clear from these that the FCA has listened carefully to feedback from the 2021 discussion paper, and that it has thought about where firms are on their D&I journeys, what firms are doing already, which interventions would be most impactful in terms of raising the bar, both within firms and in terms of their relationships with customers. So that might be one part of the answer to the question. I think another part might be that neurodivergence isn't specifically a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. It does fall under the definition of disability or long-term health condition affecting work, and whether or not that's the right approach would keep us occupied for a whole other podcast. But I know that this is an area that people feel strongly about. People have talked to me about it, for example, especially today's audience. So I would encourage you to follow GAIN's example, and through your firm or directly as an individual or through another professional body, put your views to the FCA. They will listen. And if you do decide to respond, I would encourage you to say not just that neurodiversity is important, but to talk about why it is important as well, from a customer and an employee perspective, from an outcomes perspective, essentially what you think the business case is to give the feedback, more substance and more concrete information.
Exactly. For me, it's all down to epistemic justice. If we really need to move together as a community, we need to make sure that everybody thrives by having exactly the same degree of information as a starting point. And individuals have got a lot of power in that.
Yes, I think what's interesting about this process that the FCA and PRA are going through is that they both started with a discussion paper rather than going straight to consultation paper. And that is an indication of, the complexity of this issue and the FCA's desire to listen and not rush through.
Yeah, and that's honorable. Yeah, I do appreciate that. And we should be treating themes of the society again, initially as a debate, because I think the debate or the discussion paper opens up and sort of emphasizes the fact that we are all in it together, and we don't claim to be or to indeed possess the holy grail of the matter. And there's not such a thing, meanwhile, not at least when it comes to D&I matters. Because it's human matters, and the same way we haven't actually studied the human brain, how can we really be able to have the solutions that concern exactly that case? So scientifically speaking, it's almost chasing a chimera, and we're not trying to do that. What we're trying to is essentially facilitate an environment that's much more inclusive and welcoming. And if we manage to do that, then I think we've almost, we've definitely created a better place, and we've almost found the entire solution. But entirety is not necessarily what we need. Here's a fact. And that's the last question, and thank you for staying with me all along. As a sector, we tend to operate in silo. And that's something that's been structurally the case because we have different lines of business, each allocated their own P&L. So of course we will operate in silos because we all want, by the end of the year, and we're right at this kind of prime stage, to sort of identify and demonstrate successes. I fear that unless we embed D&I across and within our business operations, and for you as a former COO, you know exactly what I'm going on about. And yes, that's my question. It will continue to be treated as an auxiliary item. Can the FCA catalyze this embedding?
Now, this is a brilliant question because it goes to the heart of what the FCA and the PRA want to see as a result of these proposals once they become requirements. They want a holistic, not a silo approach. And if firms are going to meet the new requirements, they will need functions across the organization to pull together. So no longer can D&I be the preserve of the HR team, for example. Now, what's interesting about the FCA's proposals, and here they differ slightly from the PRA's proposals, but the FCA doesn't propose to mandate any particular individual or senior manager to be responsible for D&I. And I think that this is on the basis that D&I is a cultural and behavioral issue, and therefore cuts right across the firm and must be the collective responsibility of the senior leadership of the firm. I mean, having said that, though, there are a range of measures a firm can put in place to ensure that it doesn't operate in silos and that changes are firmly embedded across an organization. You know, I'm not an expert in this area, but the ones that come to mind for me, based on my D&I experience, is, for example, holding senior leaders to account for D&I through their objectives, through their appraisals, and through their pay and bonus. Another example is ensuring that D&I have been considered in all new strategies and policies going to ExCo and the board. And as I indicated earlier, I don't mean D&I strategies and policies going to ExCo and the board. I mean any kind of marketing strategies, customer-based strategies, internal-facing strategies, external-facing strategies, all of that. For example, by getting feedback from staff and customers, and by benchmarking against peers and competitors. And this is where the kind of collegiate approach to D&I that we've been talking about today, that's where that comes in, the benchmarking piece. There's one particular FCA proposal that I've mentioned that is central to this, and that is the proposed requirement that firms should have a D&I strategy. Because what the FCA is saying is that the strategy must contain objectives and goals, plans and measures, challenges and mitigations, and it must include information about how that strategy will be shared among staff and staff awareness raised. So that makes it a cross-organizational issue. And as for that last piece of the question about catalyzing, I think you might have picked up, Vina and everyone else from our conversation today, I think the very existence of the FCA requirements, once they come into play, will catalyze the embedding of changes. And indeed, I think there's evidence already from my conversations with firms that just the proposal, let alone the implementing of the proposal, is focusing the minds of senior leaders in financial services, which can only be a good thing.
Beautiful, absolutely. And we will do anything we can to our own sort of, I guess, extent and weight to be the contributors to these actions. So beautifully said, D&I strategy. So let's move, let's shift the dial away from a D&I policy into really a D&I strategy that, as you said, cuts across the organization. And I know you haven't said that, and you definitely agree, but I just a shout out to HR, because all these years you've been trying almost in the dark, in a closed, locked, dark room to implement something that really needs people. But you've been trying to do that just with a range of policies. And we all knew that that was not practically and feasibly, possible. So now, to be able to work together with the senior leaders, and obviously the senior leaders within HR also having a seat at this table, and working together, sharing the knowledge, the experience, and being frank and raw about where we are not, but where we really truly want to go, together with the help of the regulators, the trade bodies, the membership associations, and the rest of the industry, and most importantly, with our individuals, with our people, with our employees and customers, we can certainly get there. I am entirely grateful for you, your time, your amazing experience, and the fact, most importantly, that you've been really prepared, Georgina, to share that with us. I always say knowledge is useless unless you share it. So thank you very much for doing that.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you luck in your endeavors.